Hello, friends. Welcome to a podcast where you can speak your truth and Loco will listen. My name is Jake Loco. Thank you for being here at the Loco Listens podcast. Stay tuned for a great episode, and please feel free to stick around for the outro at the end where I will give you my thoughts and reflections on this fantastic discussion. Enjoy, and thank you again for being with us. All right. Hello, my friends. I am delighted to welcome this next guest. Her name is Mira Taylor, and she is the creator of Moon and Rune Wellness. You can find her at moonandrune.com, and I'm going to read you a little bit about what she does. So Mira is an integrative therapist. She does guided wellness sessions, and a little bit about her business. Moon and Rune Guided Wellness Sessions are a format of integrative therapy that combines mental and spiritual wellness. In each session, Mira utilizes scientifically proven psychology methods in combination with a conscientious awareness of each individual's unique spiritual self. Every session is approached with the purpose of creating a genuine sense of wholeness with one's internal well-being and is uniquely centered around the individual's personal journey. Session work is centered around helping you better understand yourself and your love, the natural world, your friends, family, and even those you view as opposition in your day-to-day life. Very interesting. Very pleased to be with you today, Mira. Thank you so much. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderfully. I am absolutely honored to be on the show and incredibly grateful for the wonderful introduction. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit the site and hold space for some of the language that I've crafted for it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I do love language. We can get into linguistics later. I think we're both a big fan based on our previous conversation. But one thing I do want to start with, which it's a question I ask every guest in the beginning. So this question is, Mira, when did you start to speak your truth?
I'm still learning how to do it. I think that truth, especially inner truth, the truth of wisdom, is something that is truly an ever-evolving document. And so I would say I learn new truths about myself and my beliefs about my world, our world and others every single day. That this is something that I actually really try to guide people toward, is a space of fluidity within personal truth, to the point where they don't feel so sufferingly attached to many of the, parts of the persona that we assume are our worth. And so in the sense, I'm helping you be a shapeshifter in the best way.
Well said.
I'm teaching people how to really hone in on their most spiritual self that is capable of that sort of adaptation and presence in the moment, instead of the one that's so concerned with how other people view you.
Wonderful. Well, you brought up so many good points. I mean, number one, truth is an ongoing unfolding that we continually discover every day. So thanks for that nice reminder. And we'll definitely dive into some truth today. And I also like that you brought up, well, one, overcoming attachments, or at the very least becoming aware of them, and then trying or figuring out a way to move forward from that point. And shape-shifting, I mean, it's not what I was expecting, but it's a really cool way to look at this process. We're transforming, and we're transforming ourselves inside as within, so without. So very excited to speak to you today about Moon and Rune as well. So when I think of Moon and Rune, and by the way, my friends, we have a nice website here I was reading off of. It's moonandrune.com. So that's RUNE. moonandrune.com. Now, those are two very distinct symbols there. So the moon, we can dive into that, but there's also the rune, which reminds me immediately of Norse mythology and more of like an earthbound type of spirit. Would you like to tell us about the name of your business and a little bit about it?
Yes. So a large part of what I'm really connecting people back to through the spiritual self, or more so as a bridge between our persona, the 3D format world and experience, and the spiritual self, is intuition. That is for many, they refer to that as sort of this archetypal feminine energy that is silently not so silent once you come to understand it. And it speaks through things like metaphor and symbology and inner intuitive truths or connections, synchronicities that we experience on a highly personal level as individuals. So moon is something that I use to represent wisdom. And then rune is something that I use to represent intuition. Now, the paradox of that being that usually it takes intuition to lead to wisdom. So it's backward sort of on purpose, because I work with people around the concept of paradoxes a lot as well,
Nice.
to really help open their minds. But that the point of it was that I wanted something eloquent to exhibit that feminine archetypal energy that we all have through our state of whole consciousness. That is the thing that seems to be what most people have sort of lost a connection with, but holds the most important connection for us to perceive the world in a spiritual format and in a way that helps us feel like we're moving towards something better, keeps a sense of wonder for the world, and really just keeps the mind open to new potentials and possibilities instead of the limitations of the more analytical, rational, conscious mind that most of us are leading our life with on a daily basis.
Love that distinction. And I also love that you're helping people move towards whatever is meaningful or creates that sense of wonder, like that mystery within life that could be so easily lost in the day-to-day rat race. And speaking of that, I mean, I know a little bit about your backstory from our brief conversation last week, but I want to tell you a quick story and then turn it into a question. So I did have a teacher at one point who she was teaching holistic and integrative health. So it's probably something you're very familiar with. And she would teach cross-cultural healing methods. So we would look at how do healers in Brazil operate, or how do healers in Thailand and all these different countries, how do they bring their medicine to the people who needs it? So her story is that she was, before all this, in a corporate executive accounting job and was, in the material sense, very successful. But then she got into this horrible car accident, had a near-death experience, had the experience of leaving her body and looked down upon herself. And at that point, she made a major shift and decided to leave behind this corporate life and to pursue something a bit more holistic, something that produced that sense of adventure, like that hero's journey. And she's been a very inspiring teacher for me, and I'm happy that I've stayed connected even throughout, even after graduation and et cetera. So do you relate to that story in any way? And how would you describe the guides or mentors that helped you start this wonderful business?
So the thing that I would say that stands out most to that is something that I was thinking about a lot recently, which is that as I sort of had a similar experience or process of awakening, it's interesting because we as personas, as individuation, call it an out-of-body experience. But when you are in the out-of-body experience, it really more so feels like you've been having an out-of-source experience your entire life.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of a fascinating endeavor to come back from that and realize that that source self that you were connected to during that time is sort of this limitless, unextinguishable source within you that is intended to help shape your reality and your perceptions and your mind, your beliefs about yourself and about the world in a way that makes everything seem possible for you, instead of the ones that are often shaped by things like family, politics, faith, culture, society, media, which are other people's stories that feel limiting to you. Why? Because they're not yours.
Right, exactly.
And so I would say that's what stands out the most from that, is that she was living something that was so not her story that the universe had to throw something in there to get her to realize that it wasn't. And I did not have a dissimilar experience. I think many of us have had moments like that over the last 2.5 years, especially, that have helped open people's eyes to sort of these spiritual truths that underlie a lot of these mental health dilemmas that the mental health and wellness that many of us experience on a daily basis. And that bringing a format of that to regular daily life, that spiritual awareness, is something that we're all craving and desiring for at this point. The good news is I also believe in the law of attraction. And so I believe that the things we want, especially at a collective level, want us also. So I'm very hopeful for that being a turning point in the very near future for the format of the world.
I love that. I love that. And speaking of the law of attraction, there's something that caught my attention when I was scrolling through your Instagram page. And by the way, for anyone listening, would you like to give them your Instagram handle or anything else that you would like people, if they're interested, they're just tuning in, they don't really know much about you, but we're about to learn more and more in what you do. Where can people find you and how can they get in touch with you?
So the easiest way to get in touch with me is through the website. moonandrune.com has my email and also a contact form. But you can also follow my business account at Moon and Rune Wellness, which is where I share about a lot of mindfulness exercises or awareness practices, tips, tools, tricks, techniques for changing your own internal perception in a way that's positive. But I also offer things like Zen koans, which are a really old format of what Buddhists use to open up their mind. And, they're just sort of fun questions or riddles. It's in Egyptian culture, it would be similar to what the Sphinx would offer you, or, for example, what the Oracle at Delphi would offer you.
And it's funny because we were just talking about paradoxes, right?
Yes, exactly. My personal one, which I mostly cross-share a lot between both of those. My personal one is at Mira Taylor Wellness. And I post some things that are just, for me, that are not for the business there. So some of my poetry goes there. Nice. Some of my artwork goes there. Just things that I do for fun in my daily life that are a little less business oriented, but that I still want to share with the people that follow me so that they can get to know me a little better.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, the reason why I was asking is there was one particular post that really stood out to me, and it was about a ritual. Particularly, it could be a morning ritual, but ritual in general as a principle to guide people towards that feeling of unity with their infinite self. Kind of like what you said earlier, there's a part of us that is always was, always is, and always will be. And when people experience near-death experience or the outer body experience, in quotations like we talked about, these rituals that we practice, they could be totally personalized. They could define our entire day. So one popular example, and this is kind of what your post was about, was the first thing that people do every morning, and most of it would be on the phone. Most people would wake up and check their Bitcoin, or they would look at their emails, something of that nature. And that sets the tone and the direction for your entire day. So in your own personal life, do you have any special routines, special rituals, or things that you like doing that get you into touch with your infinite self?
So the morning actually is a pretty sacred time as far as ritual goes, and it doesn't have to be anything intense, but ritual is basically a practice that you utilize in your daily life that provides an intentional benefit or purpose for you. So ritual is also things like brushing your teeth. Basically, we all have that 30 minutes in the morning where our mind is not really on yet, that we're just going through the motions. That's definitely a ritual. And so, especially with that morning one, I kind of try to remind people that one, your mind is not all the way on yet. And so it behooves you to be careful about how much information you try to consume while your mind is in that state. Because almost anything that you try to comprehend during that first 30 minutes after you wake up is going to immediately cause anxiety, because the brain's having a more difficult time figuring out what the heck it's looking at. So I try to tell people, give yourself 30 minutes in the morning and really make the time to do that where you're without your phone, where you actually are making a ritual of giving yourself time to wake up, to be in that state of sort of motioned mindlessness that is just pure morning ritual for yourself. Because allowing yourself that space to wake up in a calm manner. Sometimes I do, if I am going to integrate with technology that early in the morning, I'll turn on like nature sounds. Right?
Nice.
Like this is a positive way that we can utilize technology to help morning ritual feel more natural instead of something that's like already drawing us into somewhat chaotic world when our mind isn't ready. So by allowing yourself this time, you actually get to be present with yourself in the morning. Your brain feels like it gets to take a breath and catch up. And then after that 30 minutes is over and you're finally ready to pick up your phone, something that would have made you really anxious after first waking up is all of a sudden much easier to handle. And so you don't end up setting that anxious tone for the day. So that's my biggest piece of advice as far as that sort of practice goes. The other thing I always recommend as a practice for folks, which is almost always part of morning routine, is a mindfulness or awareness exercise that's like a beginner-friendly format of mirror work. So almost everyone looks in the mirror first thing in the morning because most of us use the restroom, and of course, then there's the mirror, right?
Makes sense. Yep.
And so taking a moment to be really present and aware of the dialogues or narratives, the thoughts that are occurring in your mind when you make that first look in the mirror in the morning, and paying attention to things like how kind or unkind they are, how they make you feel about yourself, about the day ahead of you, and the other people you're going to interact with in that day, is something that's important to start building an observant awareness of so that you can get to a place where you can change it. But that first space in the morning before you're really integrated into the world again is a really awesome space to utilize for that sort of inner work or inner awareness, instead of hyper focusing on outer awarenesses that can set an anxious tone for the day.
Gotcha. So it's ideal to wait a bit, give yourself that half hour more if you can. And by the way, earlier we had talked about, this kind of reminds me of a Jungian idea. I know you like Carl Jung. And you had also mentioned archetypes earlier, which I'm excited to get into. But the teacher I was telling you about was living someone else's story. If she had looked into the mirror, like you said, she may have been seeing herself, not totally individuated. She wasn't on her own path. She is now, but back then she was living someone else's story. She was living someone else's truth. So it's cool that these exercises and these practices will help people learn to look within and see how they reflect out to the external world. How do they interact with the external world to move towards that more fulfilling, more wholesome existence? And it's wonderful. What do you think you've struggled with most out of anything while you've helped yourself become ready to hold space for others? What has that been like?
I think the biggest thing is making space for myself in my own life and my own body. That is, really the journey that I had to take, was to learn how to have the confidence to own my worth. One of the things that's super interesting about that mirror exercise, for example, which is both wonderful and incredibly frustrating at the same time, is the more that you work with it, the more you start to have an inner auditory experience, which helps you realize the voices which really are yours and the ones that really aren't, because of the actual voices attached to them. So the more you work with them, the more you will realize their originator, right? So for some of us, all of a sudden we'll start hearing that belief system or that narrative thought in a parent's voice, or a celebrity's voice, or someone else is close to who you have that sort of, you have enough rapport with them, enough self-connection to them that it's easy for you to imagine exactly what their voice sounds like in your mind.
Definitely.
What's interesting for many is how difficult it is to have that sort of inner auditory experience with your own voice in your mind. So one of the things I have spent a lot of time practicing actually is building my own voice as easily connectable in my own mind. And the reason being that, guess what your truth speak in? Always your voice. So it becomes very easy all of a sudden to sort of observe and release the extraneous stories, the superfluous noise that's occurring that is not your own. And for lack of a better word, exercise it or deprogram it from your mind, from your psyche, and therefore from your body. because there's the more you work with this stuff too, the more you realize how connected a lot of these physical pains or ailments or fatigues you have in your body are connected to the things that are going on up here.
Well said, well said. And to dive into this a little bit more, there's a famous Carl Jung quote where he says, "People don't have ideas, ideas have people." And we're talking about this inner monologue, or you could say the inner dialogue as well, when you're interacting with the voices of your parents or big influences in your life, like celebrities or politicians or whoever. What do you think about that statement? Carl Jung says, once again, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. It's a very profound statement. I've been stuck on it for a long time. What do you think about it?
So I think that ideas, dreams, desires we have, hopes, purposes, are really just the imbuement of consciousness through a conduit, a vessel that is us, right, as individuals. And so really it's sort of a safely scientific approach or narrative for understanding that we are all just vessels for consciousness, for spirit. And, I have this understanding of Jung's reserves on this and why he used language as a bridge in that context to really marry some of these scientific ideas and the spiritual ones, because he was around in a time that people, this was sort of the start of the rational reductionist mindset, especially in the US. And so you really he actually has quite a few writings where he speaks to that. One of the more interesting books that I found on him is one called the Gnostic Jung, which is one where he basically speaks to having a experience of being spiritually possessed and it helping him write things.
Interesting.
So I think that what's interesting about that too is even people begin to misunderstand that sort of context of possession as something other than you taking a hold of you and doing things with you, when really more so it is the highest format of self breathing its spiritual purpose through you and imbuing it into the world. Is the long of the short that lovely Carl Jung gave to us.
That's a great way to break it down. Yeah, absolutely. And I did notice on your website you mentioned Gnosticism and this personal experience of gnosis, which has always appealed to me because when I think about speaking truth, which is a big theme of this show, and finding your own path and not living someone else's story, kind of like what we just discussed, Gnosis really encapsulates that, or the idea of Gnosticism being a personal path, a personal journey, and what you seem to offer, which we're going to get into very soon, is like a personalized wellness toolkit that you can offer to people, focusing on intuition and perhaps archetypes, right? Is that something else that is a part of your repertoire, is talking about archetypes?
Yes. So a large format for this, or actually one of the easiest ones that I use with folks, is a set of some simple questions that helps me get them to connect with the truth of their persona or archetype, which is that I usually ask them, like, what are their 3 favorite characters, whether it's from, comics, movies, books, mythology, scripture, whatever, why? And then I sort of ask themselves if they're willing to see themselves in that person within session. So that's one of the first steps that I kind of take to get people to connect around archetypes. I have a lot of like simple resources, like an archetypal wheel and things that sort of break them down and connect them all at the same time, because archetypes are really this expression of source that breathes through creation in the format of what Mendelbrot and others call fractal geometric patterns. So this is why things like sacred geometry were so sacred to many of the mystics, sages, and spiritualists of age past, because they realized that they were sort of this core, simplest expression of some of these behavior patterns that exist through us as human beings. But that one of the other things I work toward with folks too is transcending existing archetypes or limiting archetypal definitions. So, for a lot of people, the main one that I usually utilize is, what's your zodiac sign? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of people egoically attach to their zodiac sign in a format by which they use it as an excuse and also use it as a limitation for themselves. That for me, I have a deeper understanding and reverence for the concept of as above, so below, which basically means that we are a tiny piece of the universe, but the entire universe is also within us, which means that, of course, you can't be just one archetype. You must be all of them, which at a basic level is like there are 12 that seem to pervade through most of time, history, mythology, scripture, stories, etc., etc. And those are pretty much succinct with the 12 zodiac archetypal signs. They're also succinct with other archetypal zodiacs, such as the Chinese zodiac, but that basically they represent parts of the most whole self that you're intended to sort of work through. So at the exterior edge of, as an example, the exterior edge of the wheel that I work with, it breaks it down into I am statements. So for Taurus, the term is I nurture. For Virgo, it's I analyze. For Libra, it's I dream, I believe. And I may be incorrect on some of those, so nobody quote me on them. But it's helpful to sort of, I've worked with stuff like that with myself, but I also provide it through format of session with my clients at the opportune moment to get them to really fill in those spaces and think about, okay, how am I limiting myself with maybe an archetypal persona that I have sort of attached my sense of value or, who I am in perpetuity to, and how is it keeping me in or boxing me in and not letting me evolve by having that more shapeshifter mindset when it comes to the archetypes.
Yeah, it's very valid. I can relate personally, and I know a lot of people do attach a lot of identity to, say, a zodiac sign, like, oh, I'm behaving this way because I'm a Taurus. This is what Taurus do, etc. So if people are wondering what it is that you offer and what a session would be like, well, today it's very special. And what we're going to do, just so people know, Mira offers the first session for free. And if you want to learn more, well, stay tuned because today we are going to go through that initial consultation. And I'm very excited for that. Would you like to say a little bit about what we're going to get into before we get started?
So the only thing I'd say is the initial consultation is probably the most formulaic that it gets when it comes to sessions with me, and it's still not all that formulaic, but it is a set of questions that I have basically come up with over time that help me get a better understanding and rapport with each individual that comes to do session with me, but that I also feel like are important questions to plant seeds with everyone. So even if it's only the initial consult you do with me, here's something you can take from it that you can sort of, and maybe after 2 months of processing it, all of a sudden you want to come back and you need some further guidance.
Right before you got cut off, you were talking about how the set of questions that you've developed was meant to be a guide. It's not like you're telling people what they should do, but you're giving people basically breadcrumbs so that if they're interested in following up after that first free session, that they can continue this path and work with you to go deeper onto some of these attachments that they might be working with or these archetypal figures that they might be trying to connect with. So is that basically what you were saying? Is there anything else that we may have missed?
So one of the other things, and this kind of plays into the two things you just mentioned, but a lot of this work becomes about really breaking down what in scripture are referred to as false idols, but in the sense of the personal inward journey, that as you experience even things like archetypes, that we have this tendency to personify them as being to a place where you're comfortable creating that sense of self within each of them instead of feeling like you have to pull someone else from outside of yourself to fill that role within you.
I see. Okay. Well, I'm really excited to get started. This is going to be interesting to show people what you offer and kind of show them what it would look like in real time so that if they feel any, because I know like I have been to a therapist once and only once, and it was after my parents got divorced.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it made me uncomfortable because I felt like I was being forced to go. Like it wasn't like my decision to go. So I was doing it out of a sense of duty, I see. But now this is way different. This is, I reached out to you and I'm excited to get into it. It's important also to bring this up. This is something that we spoke about earlier, that everyone carries around certain issues or problems that they are overcoming throughout their entire life. But just because someone wants to go through a session doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It
Right.
can be a facilitator for guidance, exploration, just deeper learning. And I'm a high school teacher. I love learning. So I just want to say that for folks who might be in the same boat as I was when I was 10 years old on that couch with my arms crossed and a little resistant to what was happening.
So we'll sort of begin. I know I said I was going to take notes, but since this is recorded, I'd like to keep the focus on screen.
Sure.
But for those of you viewing or listening at home, during a normal session, I do type notes, and providing notes after session to each of my clients is something that I find to be a huge difference between regular clinical therapy or the type of therapy or counseling that most have experienced. And that too, it's a useful resource for you to continue utilize doing the work or having something to come back to during the week to help you sort of continue the work.
Nice.
Another reason I do this is because I was the person who went to therapy and sat on the couch, and every time that pen hit the paper or that finger hit the keyboard, my mind said, what did I do now?
Right, yep.
What's wrong with me now? So a large part of why I give notes to my clients in session is so that they can have a positive experience with the sense of when I am writing things down about you, so that some of the cognitive dissonances around the therapist being there to judge you.
When there's a therapist writing down notes, that could provoke a sense of anxiety. So it's nice that you provide notes to bridge that gap. So there's a bit of transparency. There's more of a dialogue between you and your client. So it's nice that you provide that. And I definitely vibe with that. It would be nice to have something to take away, to look back on and reflect on after we are finished today.
Yeah. So, of course, I experienced therapy myself. And one of the first things that I asked myself as I started into this field was, what did I feel like was missing or, didn't feel good or felt unenjoyable about it? And how can I change that for others? So with that being said, that initial questions for the consult, which you've already sort of answered, but we'll dive a little bit deeper into them, which is, have you ever done therapy? Specifically, what kind? And then what is your most predominant memory about the experience?
So I'll tell you my most predominant memory of therapy. Briefly touched on it, but it was when I sat down on the couch. By the way, I was with my older brother. He's 4 years older than I am. I love him. He's been my role model and my mentor forever. So we went into therapy together to talk about my parents' separation and how we were dealing with it. And yeah, at the time, I was probably about 12. He was a teenager. He was just about 16. So we went in there together, and we were both sitting there with our arms crossed, and our body language definitely communicated this defensive mindset that we both had. Because, like I said earlier, we didn't want to go to therapy. We were asked to go. We were doing it to please our parents and to put them at ease, which is something I think it's important to bring that up, is that we were doing this as a sense of duty to our family. So the therapist was very kind, and she's like a family friend of my mother. And she pointed out the fact that the two of us were sitting there next to each other, pretty much closed off. And it was nice to bring awareness to body language, because just like you were saying with thoughts, the story that we tell ourselves is exactly what will reflect back out in the external world. So I pay close attention now. Since that day, I've taken that away from her, or that I've had a very positive takeaway. Even though I didn't enjoy being in therapy, she helped me realize that my body language, posture, and tone of voice too, all these things contribute to our sense of self, our energy, and the the vibe that we put out, whatever we attract. And so I'm thankful that that one therapy session, my one and only therapy session, gave me that nice takeaway, that insight. Um, can't remember the other question you asked, but
So it basically was what you remember most about it, and
Mhm.
you see how autonomic it is
Mhm.
to reprise experiences from an emotional center. So
Right.
that is what you remember most about it.
Mhm.
Now, what's interesting is there is, of course, paradox present because
Mhm.
you both appreciate it and resent it.
Mhm.
Right? So this is not dissimilar to how most people have a format of therapy. And by the way, our generation especially, having more separations in parents in the average household,
Mhm.
had a lot of experiences like this,
Yeah.
which also meant that you as a child probably had an ideology around what the result of that therapy session
Mhm.
meant at a larger scale for you. And so there's a lot of really like serious implications of, put on children, especially
Mhm.
in those formats. And so the defensive nature of that, and you expressing that as a child is not at all surprising by any
Right.
means. I
It's
am
very
very
predictable.
happy that you got wisdoms from it.
Mhm.
But I think that you also learned the format by which you want to initiate or engage with therapy is in a sense that feels like it's self-desired
Yeah.
instead of required.
Well said. Well
The
said.
requirement feeling is never good. So the next question becomes, what was something you really liked about the experience? And you kind of went into that, but was there anything else that stood out from you that really, you were like, yeah, this is a part of this model that if I
Mhm.
could keep just that, I would keep going to therapy. I like that about it.
Absolutely. So, well, when it comes to divorce and dealing with family issues, I've always found that it's been very, very helpful to have a non-biased third party who isn't in the household, who isn't in the situation, that can reflect back to you basically like what you've been saying and show you, like mirror to you what you're putting out. So when we were describing the situation at home with our parents and some of the fighting that was going on and just these other conflicts that we were absorbing basically and integrating into our own personalities, she did an excellent job of reflecting back to us what she was hearing. And she would actually use that phrase to be non-assuming, but to say, well, what I'm hearing is this. Or, oh, are you saying that blank? She was clarifying the meaning behind our language. So to never assume what we were trying to get across. And I love this because as a teacher, it's important also when we're having a discussion to do the same thing. I try to avoid assumptions and to reflect back or mirror back what someone's saying, trying to paraphrase it above all else, to bridge that gap between our understanding and our individual perspectives.
Well, I'm very thankful for the seed she planted in you that's making a difference in so many other lives now. What a wonderful thing, right?
Yeah.
How small those ripples can start and how large they can become.
Hmm.
Okay, so I really love that. What is something that stood out as like just, and the requirement aspect of it, I know already is the
Hmm.
thing that stands out the most, is something you disliked about it. But was there anything else from the session that stood out as, this is, if I went back to therapy, this is a format or portion of this that I would prefer my therapist didn't utilize or, waited for the right moment to utilize?
Okay. This is interesting because we only went once, and the format was her practice was in her living room. So there was like a closed off section of her home, and she invited us in. It was very comfortable. I mean, the first thing that I think of is, well, I was young and naive and resistant, so doing one session and one session only, it gave me a lot, but it could only give me so much. And, this is a bit ironic because you brought this up earlier, but I was sent away empty-handed. And it was almost like we were having this conversation that was very important and could have been very transformative more immediately. But the fact that we left with our hands in our pockets, we didn't really have much else. And I'm not saying that we should always take something away physically, tangibly, but I know that most of our session was motivational. It was like, okay, I understand that you and your brother are going through this tough time, and you're going to have to deal with it, and I just want you to understand that both of your parents love you and they asked you to come here because they love you. And it was almost like she was convincing us to understand that therapy was designed to, as a way, like this therapy session was designed so that my brother and I could feel loved and supported during this turbulent time. So again, it's very ironic to bring this up, but yes, the one thing I would change is I wish I could see what she was writing down on her notebook so that I could take away those insights and think about them and reflect on them. That's what I would have loved to change about that one session.
So, of course, this is why I do the notes.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting about this to me, too, is even the concept that, it was really a conversation to lead you into an understanding that others wanted you to have,
Mm-hmm.
versus being open to and receptive to providing solutions for the mindset that you and your brother were handling or
Mm-hmm.
coping with, and the emotional states that you were experiencing through the divorce.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit different as far as how I would approach it, is that
Mm-hmm.
I'm really here to mold the session to what's most efficient and available to your journey, and what can be utilized most effectively in a solution-based, sustainable manner, so that I can give you some mindset changes or self-guided questions or affirmations or inner work that creates a sustainable sense of, feeling centered and present,
Mm-hmm.
instead of feeling, kind of thrown about by the things that happen in your life.
Yeah.
Which brings me to sort of the next or final question that I always ask everyone as sort of the jumping off point for thinking about doing sessions, is for you as the individual to take the power within therapy and tell me as the practitioner what you desire for yourself from working together.
When I reflect on the dynamic between a therapist and a client, what seems to be key and important and like high priority is creating an open dialogue where, like you said earlier, holding space, making space, creating a space that allows for vulnerability and an open flow of communication. I think most people feel very afraid when they are revealing something difficult and they're not quite sure if the person that they're speaking with is going to receive it in a beneficial way for them. And it's also, I mean, for me personally, it's hard to have a one-sided conversation. So I think I would naturally want to ask you questions about yourself as well. So sometimes imagine feeling guilty that, oh, we're just talking about me and me and me and me, and feeling very self-centered. So I guess what would be important is a little bit of reassurance about the goals, the intentions, and above all else, creating that space that invites vulnerability and is able to transform it in that alchemical sense. We always bring lead to these conversations, and how can we walk away from it and turn it into gold? I think that's something I focus on a lot during school, especially now we're talking about the Holocaust. So it's a very heavy lead material that we're dealing with. How are we going to help these kids think about that trauma and turn it into gold in their own lives? How is that possible? How can we work together and be in mutual correspondence to create a space for healing and growth and evolution? And so again, I'm thankful that you were kind enough to come on here and kind of guide us through this and show us what this is all about. And I hope that answers your question. I know I can rant a bit, but
well, actually, if I'm being honest, it's conjecture avoidance, right? Because even in this format, you aren't wanting to make space for yourself.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I would want to work with you on, or to guide you toward, is to a space where you create the space for yourself, for that inner knowing, because that's the only space that can actually heal you. I can ask you the questions that will help you on the journey, but getting you to feel confident about the things you desire from life and being able to let go of belief systems like the idea that that is arrogant or selfish, or, selfish is a funny word. And by the way, language and belief systems are something that I really hit home with a lot of people, but I'll use the word selfish as an excellent example. Most people assign the value of selfish to behaviors, any behavior that is self-serving. But the reality of a selfish behavior is that it is only a selfish behavior if the thing that you are doing for yourself harms another and you choose to not care. You choose to harm another to make yourself happier or better. Right. So being centered within yourself, to have the confidence to know that it's not selfish, to make space for yourself in the situations that benefit most from them, and working with the belief systems that need to be sort of deconstructed, especially around the way we use certain words and language like selfish to make things less attainable or limited for ourselves, is a huge format that I start with folks in session, especially around awareness. But that the other thing that comes along with this is that it helps people understand that belief systems can be really simple. Ritual, just like belief, or more so the other way around, belief just like ritual, is this thing that people sort of aggrandize in their mind as being like, oh, you must mean like, do I believe in God? Well, yeah, sure, that's a belief system, but your ability to accept that it's okay to be proud of yourself or to act from a place that is centered within yourself is a simple belief system. Obviously, the better belief that most of us should integrate is that we should be able to work and live joyously.
You were talking about what sounds like the abundance mindset, where if you have a belief that making money is this arduous, difficult, almost impossible thing, that it will be difficult, arduous, and impossible. But if you change your relationship and your belief around money, around love, around your career, all these beliefs can be transformed to create more of a sense of ease and to be able to live more joyously. I love this message that you're sending to us now. It's very inspirational, to be honest with you.
Well, I hope that it is. That is actually something that I want people to experience from this format of therapy, is that they feel a sense of wonder again, that they feel inspired to live their life, to pursue purpose that is meaningful and personal to them. And that they, spend some time learning that they can live a spiritually and live enriching life just as they already are. They just have to change their awareness to it, and accept it in the present. So interestingly enough, as we talk about beliefs and we sort of mention the power of words and language, when we define words like intelligence, success, happiness, being enough, how charismatic or uncharismatic or popular or unpopular we are, that these are belief systems we hold about ourselves that are based around the way we've defined a word away from us in the present moment. We've defined it in a way that is not self-inclusionary. And so that's, again, one of those simple formats between that sort of marries the concept of wellness linguistics with working within belief systems at the subconscious level to help people realize, okay, well, how can I be intentional about changing the definition of success to include myself in it now? How can I change the definition of happiness to include it as something I am experiencing in the present moment of my life? And that these are really powerful and impactful ways to work within your own mind to change your perception of reality in a way that makes a sustainable difference to how you're feeling on a daily basis.
I love it. I love it. And you just reminded me of something that we spoke about earlier last week, that your name, Mira, like the verb mirar is to see or to look. And it's what you're offering is helping people change the way that they see, whether it's how they're viewing their external environment or those internal situations that we deal with, those repetitive behaviors or those rituals that we adopt every day. And it's very fascinating that you are able to hold up that mirror for your clients. I mean, that's how I feel right now, is thinking about language. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The lens of the doors of perception are wide open, and I almost said lens of perception. It's like we're keeping it clean. We're able to see with clarity whether we're looking at those rituals or those beliefs or those attachments that we hold on to. And so far, I could say that this has been very interesting, especially looking at language and the words that we choose and the story that we tell with subtle words or subtle.
Yes.
Mhm.
So, the thing about language is that realistically, it's also the way we practice imbuing our consciousness with intention.
Mm.
So thinking about the thoughts, the narratives, the words that you utilize in your mind all day that are imbuing your consciousness, whether you are conscious of it or not, is something that affects what you sort of energetically attract into your life. But it also is basically what shapes your reality for you, not just because it's shaping your mind through the psyche and perception, but because of the things that it attracts to you too, right? So like attracts like. And interestingly enough, I work with affirmations and mantras a lot as a way to get people to practice a more beneficial concept of language. So we work a lot in session around folks are really good at identifying what I refer to as I don't deserve moments, right? Which are the moments that we experience where basically we were like, I didn't like the way that felt. And and we go on diatribes venting about it, but all we're doing is compounding it because we're continuing to think about it and we're just repeating and regurgitating the same
Perpetuating.
information, bringing more of it to ourselves. So the trick I teach people with this is to take the next step always. And if this means writing down your I don't deserve moments from the day, that's okay. Take that step so that you can take the next step, which is to say, all right, I have this information. What does this tell me that I do want? How can I use language to be intentional about shaping and thinking about what this means, what this I don't deserve behavior showed me I do deserve, that I do want, that I do desire. Remembering that the things you want you also. Like attracts like. So by taking that next step of receiving what, is those I don't deserve moments, where sometimes I refer to it as kind of the sandpaper, the abrasion of life, that you have a choice about how you polish yourself against it. Now, letting it run through your head and compounding it and repeating it all day long because you're frustrated about it, is how you end up just grinding yourself into nothing, right?
It's a lot of resistance.
That's not how you polish a gem properly. So experience it, rub up against it, and then help it format what it is that you actually want from life.
There are certain words, phrases, or thoughts that we might butt up against. They might make us feel resistance, and we can keep on thinking about them all day and continue to perpetuate that cycle. Or we could use these thoughts, this information, that energy, information, and help ourselves to move beyond it, recognize what it's showing us, and then acting on it, taking action.
Basically, I would say the thing that comes off of this, to bring it back to Jung actually, is that the next thing I get people to try and understand is that what they're really experiencing is a reflection of their projection, right, of their perception. And that Carl Jung had this wonderful quote, which basically was, everything that irritates us about others has something to teach us about ourselves.
Yes.
And so even when we experience those sort of abrasive moments, those I don't deserve moments, and take that next step to define what it is we do deserve and want from life, having then the conscious responsibility to ask ourselves, well, I have to be the change I want to see for the world. Is this behavior that I found abrasive, if I'm honest with myself, something that I do to others? And if it is, only then are you going to be able to truly accept it and change it. Why? Because now it's become self-centered.
Like you said, there are things about other people or behaviors that other people have that might bother me, and I could push that away and pretend that it has nothing to do with me. But instead, what you're saying, which makes so much sense, by the way, is to bring it back to a self-centered point of view, to learn, what does that resistance have to teach me about myself? How could I use this bit of resistance to progress through it, to let it go, and to, next time I encounter that stimuli, how am I going to respond differently? And that's a wonderful learning experience, and it's a great opportunity to reflect once again.
Yes. It also becomes super important as we work toward things like understanding how to take down walls, but put up healthy boundaries. So that's something I approach a lot in session with folks too, is, where have you put up a wall in your mind or between yourself and others because of fear, versus where can we create a healthy boundary that's based in, an awareness, just a genuine awareness of what that person is in your life. And so this is, again, where intuition work comes in, because you may come up against that person again and have the same experience after changing that particular behavior or trait about yourself. And you have to have enough inner knowing or intuition to know when it's no longer you that's causing that reflection. It's not always the case, right? But that almost always, if we ask ourselves that, if we use the Carl Jung quote as a jumping off point, I've sort of subconsciously integrated it into my mind as a working format, is that, you'll have an intuitive moment that either connects you to that behavior, or you have a deep inner knowing that it's not your work to do anymore, but that it then becomes information about whether or not that's a person you welcome into your life on a regular basis, that becomes a space for a healthy boundary versus a wall, for example.
Very important distinction there between boundaries and walls. And I do want to give you this bit of feedback. I appreciate these questions and how they've guided me to get in touch with my own intuition and how I relate to these memories. And it helped me separate from, well, my parents sent me here, this was their intention, but what was my intention? And if I were to go back and do it again, how would I approach it differently? And this was very helpful to think about not the story that I was given, but the story that I'm writing myself.
I think basically we found the right origin point for you, especially with the relationship with therapy, but also some of the narratives that are based in, child experience that are ones that we don't have choice points over, and how we could work together to dismantle some of those, or use the raw material and reconstruct them, isn't it? Like alchemize them, basically. Because I think about how very different that therapy experience could have been for you and your brother if you simply had been asked the question, what are you guys hoping to get from speaking today about the situation with your parents?
Yeah.
Right. So that's an interesting. I'll leave you with that question as present self.
Yeah.
So that you can spend some time on it in the present. I talk to people a lot too about the mind being very much like a time machine, and so these are actually moments that, as we visualize them and reconnect with them in our mind, having questions like this to replace the memory or replace the sort of connective visual that you have to it can be extremely healing for you to do it through the mind in the present moment by connecting to that past version of yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. These questions have prompted me to time travel and shapeshift back into 12-year-old Jake, who would have to go through those memories one more time just to really take a closer look at what was actually going on versus, I'm about to turn 27 years old. So there's a big gap between then and now. And it's important to think about these experiences in the present and feel what they've done to me in the present and how I've grown and evolved from that point on, but to also have the opportunity to place myself back in that mindset as a 12-year-old kid and to go through that mindset of what is this going to be like going into therapy and how might I approach it differently now as a 27-year-old man. It's very, very interesting. And I'm definitely looking forward to meeting up again, to doing another session and to dive deeper into some of these questions that I feel like we could dive into for another couple hours. It's going to be really interesting. Now sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you very much also for your willingness to be vulnerable with your audience. Again, I speak about paradox a lot, but one of the main paradoxes I love most, especially about emotional states, is that our perception of what vulnerability is that it is something that is sort of connected to weakness, but that I find there is almost always greater strength that comes from self and self-expression. So, and I hope that you gained strength from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. You're a wonderful guide. And I have two questions before we wrap up. The first question is for those who are listening and still might be on the fence. What would you say to anyone who still might have this bit of resistance that, they might not feel totally comfortable even after they've watched us go through this process? They still have a bit of resistance. What might you say to them? How might you help them begin to open up to the idea of integrative therapy?
So I would say schedule a session with me and tell me what your resistance is.
Good answer. Good answer. Let's talk about it.
Because I want to hear it, because it's something that we're going to work with anyway. And that, another good question to ask yourself is this resistance based in fear, or is this resistance based in, something that's self-loving? Resistance doesn't feel good, right? And so again, I go back to the things you want you also. If you think for a second, maybe I want to do therapy, and then you have thoughts that follow up that are fear-based, that create a sense of resistance, remember that first thought. That's the inner truth to hold on to. Don't let the fear-based narratives pop up and create a sense of resistance that keeps you from the things that your soul, your spirit is really wanting you to do for yourself, because it knows that you deserve them and to experience them in this lifetime.
I love it. And I'll comment just because we've just gone through this session and I can feel sincerely what you said earlier is absolutely true. My goals are your goals. We share this mutual intention of healing and growth. And I do feel like we've done exactly that today. So my last question for you, Mira, I want to thank you for being on the Local Listens podcast. I like to end by asking you this. If you could think back to your younger self, whether that was you yesterday or last week or last month or last decade, think back to your younger self. If you could give your past self any kind of message, any kind of guidance, what would you tell Mira in the past?
Stop putting yourself second. Or third, or fourth, or anything other than first. That's always the place you're supposed to hold in the podium of your own mind.
I love that.
Apparently, I needed to hear it today, too. I'm very happy to let my spirit speak through me sometimes and say the truth that we need to hear.
I love that, yes. Putting ourselves first. We broke down the stigma of selfishness, but you've helped me realize, and I hope my listeners have also felt the same way, that we can all work together while staying centered in self. And that's a good thing. That can be a place of healing, and love is in the self, in the center. So thank you again, Mira. It was lovely talking to you. It was so nice to meet you. And I'm really looking forward to doing this again sometime.
Me too. And thank you very much again for sharing me with the audience, and for sharing yourself so much with the audience as well. I hope that everyone got something beneficial from it.
Absolutely. And that's one last time. That's moonandrune.com. Please go and look at Mira's work. You won't regret it. And I am, how should I say this? I feel fulfilled that we've done this, because this is karma that was left over from a 12-year-old perspective. Now that I've gone through another therapy session today, it seems like, okay, now my understanding of therapy has transformed. So I hope if you're listening to this now that you feel the same way. And with that being said, good night, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey there, friends. Thank you for sticking around to the outro. I appreciate you listening. This will be episode numero uno. So thank you, Mira, for helping me get started. And wow, make sure you guys go to moonandrune.com to check out Mira's work. Once again, great blend of Gnosticism, Jungian archetypes, depth psychology, and overall this integrative therapy experience has been very fascinating. I did not expect to dive so deep into those 12-year-old memories of mine. So It's nice to gain a little perspective, and I really want to thank Mira for being so cooperative, for being so generous, and of course, I'm really looking forward to speaking with Mira again, so stay tuned for that. And once again, guys, moonandrune.com. Please go support Mira's work. You can follow her on Instagram as well at Mira Taylor Wellness. And lastly, I do want to say this. This is episode number 1 of Loco Listens, as I said earlier, and I just want to thank everyone who's been so positive and encouraging throughout this whole process of creating this podcast, my little baby. And now here we are at the end of episode 1. So once again, thank you for everyone who's been reaching out to me. I'm looking forward to having so many cool discussions. Whoever you are, I will listen to you. So whether you're a small business owner trying to promote your work, or you're just someone who wants to share their weird and quirky views with everyone else, well, I have a platform for you. I'd be happy to speak to you. So please, you can contact me at locolistens@gmail.com. Find me on Instagram at locolistens. And without further ado, my final message for you is this. Wherever you are, be here, be now, and be you.